not going to go too in depth to all the different features of the program, but rather a brief overview of how to get your photos inside of Lightroom and start making basic adjustments. So let's jump right into it. Let's open up Lightroom. And if this is your first time using Lightroom, you will probably be prompted to create a new catalog. A catalog is basically what I have here. It's just a collection of the photos that you're going to be working with. If you need to create a new catalog, you can go up here to File, click New Catalog, name it whatever you want, and save it. I have mine saved to pictures just to make things easier for finding it. Okay, so now we have our new catalog and we're ready to get our photos inside of Lightroom to start editing. What we're going to do is we're going to come down here to the bottom left corner and click Import. So this will bring you to this screen, and over here in the left you have your connected sources. Right now I only have one of my memory cards plugged in and my hard drive. So if your photos are stored on your hard drive, you can find them wherever you have them here. For this, we're going to be using the ones off my memory card. So I'm going to let these load up real quick. And the photos we're going to be working with today are down here. So by default, all of these will be selected. If you want to have just certain photos selected, you can do uncheck all and then come up here and highlight the ones you'd like to bring in, check them, and then click import. So now we have all our photos inside of Lightroom and we're ready to start editing. After you import, everything will be here in the library module. This is kind of an overview of all the pictures that you have in here. You can change the way that these are sorted by coming down here to sort and clicking whatever you want. I like to keep it on capture time. It's just the way that I like to do it, but you guys can put it wherever you want. So to start editing, you can click a photo that you want to start with and go over here to the develop module. So this is where all the magic is going to happen and where all your edits will actually take place. Over here on the left, we have our preset tabs. These are pre-made filters inside of Lightroom. I personally don't like to use these, but they're here if you want to use them. Underneath we have our history tab. Anything you do to your photo will appear here. If you don't like a step you took, you can press Command Z or just go back and click through your previous steps here. On the right hand side of the screen we have our basic adjustments. Alright, so first and foremost you have your color temperature up here. You can play with these sliders to get the right white balance. You can also scroll through this menu and they have different presets available. Or you can click this eyedropper right here and click a white point in your image to balance out your color temperature. I like this, but I think it's a little bit cool, so I'm just going to bump this over a little bit warmer than it was. So next we have our exposure slider. This basically controls the lightness or darkness of our image. For this image, I'm going to pull it up just a touch. These highlights are already blown out, but I'm going to try and minimize that as much as I can. Contrast, you can pull this down or up to add contrast depending on your liking. I'll give this a tiny bump, but I don't think it really needs too much. So next we have highlights and shadows. You can pull this down to recover a little bit of detail in your highlights or pull it up if you want them to be brighter. For this image, I'm going to pull it down just a little bit to try and bring back some detail here. Same thing with our shadows. This is going to control the darks of the image. We can bring this up to get back some detail in some of the darker areas of the image, or we can bring this down if we wanted to make those darker. For this, I'm going to pull this up just a tiny bit, get a little bit of lost detail in these trees and this outfit here. So next we have the white and black sliders right here. You can pull this up or down, and that will take the whitest parts of your image and either make it brighter or darker depending on what you choose. Same thing for the blacks, but with the darker parts of the image, you can pull this up to globally pull all your blacks up, or you can pull this down to bring the darkest parts of the image down more. For this, I'm gonna leave that about just a little bit darker than where it was, just to kind of add some more contrast. So next we have our clarity, vibrance, and saturation. So clarity is basically the definition of the image. Slide this all the way up. You can see it kind of gives it this grungy look to it. And if we pull it all the way down, it really washes out a lot of this detail and makes things kind of blurry and dreamy like. I don't like to use clarity too much. I see a lot of beginners have the tendency to drag their clarity slider way up too high, and it gives it this weird look to it. If you're going to use clarity, I suggest only using it to about 20 or so, just to add a small punch to some of the lines here and make it a little bit sharper, but nothing too crazy. Vibrance and saturation, personally, I like to use vibrance as opposed to saturation. If I pull this vibrance slider up just a little bit, you can see it adds some more yellow, sunny color to really the midtones, whereas saturation is just kind of everything, and it makes the image look way too saturated and way too colorful, like you're trying to boost the colors too much. So I like to pull this up just a tiny bit, just to get a little bit more detail in there, and that looks good to me. So from that little adjustment we did right there, we can check the before and after by pressing the backslash key and check out the before and after of our photo. So that's just from our basic adjustments we did right there. We took it from sort of underexposed and not much really going on to a little bit more colorful, and the image kind of comes to life. Okay, so next we have the tone curve. The tone curve is really cool because it allows us to manipulate the contrast of our image with a lot more control than the slider in the basics tab. So you can just pull these around a little bit and see what looks good. You can also edit color channels directly by selecting the red, green, or blue under the channel tab. Next we have the HSL tab. This is basically your hue, saturation, and luminance of the image. You can pull this around if you wanted to change the colors of the image at all. I like the colors where they were, so we're not really going to play too much with this today. Okay, next we have our HSL tab here. This is going to control our hue, saturation, and luminance of each color. If you want to play with a certain color, this will allow you to manipulate just that color. So if we wanted to change just our oranges and make it a little bit more red or yellow, we can do that here under the hue tab. Saturation controls the amount of that color. So if you wanted to add more of a certain color, you can just pull that color way up. Or if you wanted to get rid of a color, you can just pull that way down. Okay, so next we have our split toning tab here. This will allow you to push certain colors in just the highlights and just the shadows if you wanted to get a cool duotone look. So if you wanted to add, let's say, blue to your shadows, you could bring this slider over to the blues, bump up the saturation so you can see it, and let's say if you wanted to add orange in the highlights, you could pull this to the orange, bump up the saturation on that, and scroll through and see what you like. We're not going to do this today for our image, so I'm just going to click this button right here, which will turn the split toning off and bring our image back to how it was before. Next we have the detail tab, which will allow you to sharpen your image as well as reduce noise if needed. I don't think we need it for this, so we're going to skip over that. Lens correction, you can correct your profiles here by just clicking remove chromatic aberration, enable profile corrections. And if you enable profile corrections, you can see Lightroom adapts to what lens you were using. I was using the Sigma 35, so it corrects for any lens distortions. Okay, next we have our transform tab. From here you'll be able to rotate and scale your image if you need to. If you're photographing buildings, you can also change the perspective here as well. We don't need to do that for our photo today, so I'm just going to turn this off. Next we have our effects tab. This is mainly for vignetting, so we can add a white vignette or a black vignette by pulling this slider. You can adjust the midpoint, feather, and all other characteristics of it in here as well. We also have the dehaze slider here, which is really useful if you have a foggy photo and want to get rid of the fog. You can slide this up to get rid of that. Or if you have a clear photo and want to make it look a little bit more hazy, you can just pull this down and it adds sort of a washed over effect to it. Next we have our camera calibration tab. This is the way that the camera perceives color. So if you pull these in any direction, it will change the entire look of your image. So that basically sums up all these different menus here. Up top here we have our crop tool, we have our clone stamp and healing brush, red eye correction, which I don't ever use, gradient masks, radial masks, as well as the brush tool. Gradient mask and the radial mask tool are really handy if you only wanted to adjust part of an image rather than the whole thing. So if we select this gradient mask, we can draw in a little adjustment here, and I'll bring this to neutral. And so if we wanted to add maybe a burst of sun coming into our subject's left here, we can pull up the exposure on just the side of him and can adjust the temperature as well too. So if there's a certain part of your image you want to manipulate without damaging the rest, you can use these masks right here. And when you're done, you can click close, or I don't like it, so I'm just going to hit delete. Okay, so once you have your photo done and you've made all the adjustments, you're satisfied with how it looks, we're going to come down here, click our image or images we want to export, and scroll down to export. And from here, you'll be able to select where you want it to go. I like to keep mine on my hard drive, right at the desktop. Don't need to name it anything important. I like to keep my quality all the way up, and I don't really touch this stuff too much. Make sure image sizing is unchecked if you want your best resolution, and you can go ahead and click export. There you have it, guys. That was how to use Lightroom for beginners. If you have any questions or anything I missed in this tutorial you'd like to see, please leave it in a comment below. If this video helped you guys out, be sure to like and subscribe for more content. Peace.